Blog Talk Radio.
Hello, everyone. This is Ayn Rand Taking Liberty, Episode 1. I am Scott Schiff, joined with Ed Maslish. Ed, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Hey, Scott. Great to be a part of the team.
Absolutely. We're both big Ayn Rand fans. We kind of met over social media. I think part of the show is that as we're getting to know each other, there can be some kind of character development there. But just in terms of, what we're trying to do and what purpose, I think it was in the Fountainhead that Rourke's mentor said, the most depraved man is a man without a purpose. So we should at least spell out our purpose.
I was sorry to interrupt you, Scott, but I think that was actually Francisco de Reardon in Atlas Shrugged.
Okay. You see some of the details, and I need you there to help keep me on track. But I try to at least keep the fundamentals right.
That's
all right.
right.
It'll give people something to look up later. So,
I don't profess to be perfect, and, maybe I made a mistake too, so we can both check it out later.
So let's, I can jump into my vision of the purpose. You can go into yours. We're going to have a lot of time to hash all this out.
Yeah, I mean, as I see it, I think we've got two purposes. One, more immediate and smaller, and one larger. I mean, the more immediate and smaller purpose is to provide some leadership in the objectivist community and the Ayn Rand community. I think you and I, from our private conversations, have come to the conclusion that there are some fundamental problems with some of the people that are speaking on behalf of Ayn Rand's name. And, we have some objections to it, and we want to be on record as offering an alternative point of view and speaking out in what we believe is true and what we believe are proper principles for objectivism in today's cultural climate. So that's the first purpose. And the larger purpose that I see is to provide moral support more generally, not just in the objectivist community, but more broadly to the right in general. And, one of the things that, at least from my perspective, I'll speak for myself, not you, I see the current objectivist movement doing everything it can to alienate and demoralize the right, whereas I know for me, and I think for you, I'd like to provide moral leadership and moral support to people on the right. I think that Ayn Rand has the answers and the moral arguments that the right needs, and alienating them is not going to solve anything that we want.
Absolutely. They're kind of rudderless right now, besides Trump as the leader. And, they accuse him of being a fascist. He's no fascist, but, if nobody comes along and offers better answers for this leftist threat, that is what the future can hold. And they'll be, wishing for the good old days of Trump like they wish for the good old days of Bush now. I want to help people see that.
Go ahead. No, I was just if you don't offer good candidates to protect people's interests, people will eventually move down the list to the least undesirable candidate that will protect their interests, because people do want to protect their interests on some level. I mean, sometimes people are voting for moral ideals that are against their interests, but ultimately, for instance, we're talking about Trump. We can talk, you talk about the wall, you talk about immigration. You can, if you kick out from polite society and polite conversation all the acceptable candidates, Republicans and Democrats, and you only allow people who are, I want to use the word extremist, but this is an objectivist program, so I won't say that. But, if the only people who are allowed to talk about putting up border security and putting up walls are the white nationalists or the fascists, and foreign invasion of certain peoples is creating problems in the society that the more mainstream parties are not addressing, well, eventually people are going to go down the list and say, okay, well, this person's not addressing the problem. I'm going to go down to the least undesirable person that does address it. And, as you aptly put it, right now it's Trump, but it might be someone a lot worse if Trump is made into a bad guy.
That's right. And so, our effort, in a sense, is to try to help direct the right. And, there have been attempts of people that have been religious that have wanted to embrace Ayn Rand that just get shut down. I mean, look, if you agree not to initiate force and not to try to, generally control other people, then there's a place for an alliance. And, this starts to go back to the original Peikoff telling David Kelly not to speak to the libertarians. It's all about keeping people out of the movement. And we've just got to change that whole mindset. 37 years later, it just isn't working.
I agree with almost everything you said there. I mean, my only quibble, and it would be a quibble, not a disagreement, would be, bringing it back to the making the fundamental that as long as people aren't looking to initiate force, that's who we should be aligning with. Now, I clearly don't believe in initiating force against other people, but
right.
Making the non-aggression principle any kind of fundamental, I think that's the libertarian and the anarchist position, and I don't think that's Ayn Rand's position.
I understand what you're saying, and I'm not even saying that it has to be that per se, but to pick a standard. With Rand, it was, and for the New Intellectual, it was rejecting Attila, the initiation of force, and the witch doctor, the, kind of mystic or emotions as tools of cognition. I think that, comparatively, and this is going to be a continuing theme of the show, is that the faith of Christians is kind of quaint by comparison to these postmodernists telling us that reason and rationality are constructs of privilege, and that actually represents a deeper mysticism than people that, supposedly openly profess faith.
Well, Jesus was sort of the first hippie, and he was a pacifist at heart. He talked about turning the other cheek. He talked about not initiating force, even if the other side is committing force. So when I hear some of the objectivists get so vicious against Christians, it just makes me wonder if they really take the non-initiation of force principle seriously, especially when contrasted with the way they treat other religious people, like, for instance, Muslims, who have a religion that is grounded in force and based explicitly on force and killing the infidel wherever you can find him, and on a prophet whose whole life was about war and conquest. And they don't seem to have as much of a problem with, say, immigration of Muslims into a free society as they do with Christians acting as pacifists within that free society to just advocate for their own, hippie-ish pacifist Christian beliefs.
Well, yeah, and obviously within it's not fair to collectively judge Christians. There's a whole spectrum of them, from
That's
people
true.
that have cult-like beliefs to, and I happen to believe that the longer a religion is around, the more for it to survive, it has to come to terms with reality to some extent. I mean, Judaism being the oldest, and then Christianity, and Sisi, and the leader of Egypt, was talking about how Islam needs a reformation, and that's where we're at. And it's actually because Marxism is the most recent religion, is part of why it's the most dangerous, and it's the most fervent, and it hasn't been properly discredited like the other faiths, and so.
I was just going to
Go
say,
ahead.
I mean, first of all, I think Marxism has been pretty well discredited. I mean, the wall did come down in, your lifetime and my lifetime. I would also say that Marxism is old in comparison to, say, environmentalism. And I think environmentalism is not just more, very dangerous, but it's got the biggest foothold in our government, even more so than socialism does. I mean, we can't even have as much water as we want in our toilets without getting permission from the government. We can't throw our trash away in the garbage the way we want unless we separate it according to environmentalist dogma. We can't figure out what kind of gasoline we can put in our car without getting permission from the environmentalists. So, I mean, to me, the environmentalists are both even more recent and more dangerous and proliferating more in our government than even the socialists. And the socialists have got a pretty big toehold in our government, too.
Absolutely. I just feel that while we are fighting these various groups, and I apologize, I lost my train of thought a little bit, but I want to help people see the tactics of the left to help take down the religion of postmodernism and then build on that, to actually show that reason and individualism and capitalism are the keys to life extension, this kind of transhumanist stuff that we're going to get into as well, which life extension technologies, it's the extension of Rand's morality of life. And so that's going to be, that may not be one of your themes right now, but it will be.
Well, I'll tell you one of my themes, and if you remember, in multiple places, Ayn Rand talked about or critiqued Immanuel Kant and said that Kant created such a vision of reason that people looked at it and said, if this is reason, I don't want any part of it. And I look at what the current leadership of the objectivist movement is putting out as objectivism, as what they think Ayn Rand meant, or how they think Ayn Rand would interpret current events. And I think people are looking at it and saying, if that's objectivism, we want no part of it. And the proof is in the pudding. The Ayn Rand Institute is not penetrating the culture. If anything, it's retrenching. Same thing with the Atlas Society. Objectivism should be spreading. Objectivism should be moving through the culture. It should be gaining a wider acceptance and a greater toehold. But I think that its leading proponents, frankly, are selling things that people don't want. And in the same exact way that Ayn Rand said, people looked at what Kant described as reason and said, if that's reason, we don't want it. People are looking at objectivism and saying, if that's what Yaron Brook thinks objectivism is, we don't want it either.
And the charge for years has been that they had to keep things pure to stop people from distorting the way the ideas were presented. And what do we in fact see? That it turns out that even in their quest for purity, they're the ones that are turning people off of it in the way they promote it and the way they try to tell people what you have to believe. And go ahead.
Well, yeah, I mean, if you want to talk about purity, I mean, one of the first rules of purity of what Ayn Rand said was nobody gets to speak for her except for her. Ayn Rand was very clear and very explicit that she didn't want an organized movement. She believed in an intellectual movement, but nobody had the right to speak for her. And there are people today who are arrogating to themselves the right to speak for her, and not just to speak for her, but to try and silence anyone who disagree with them. And if you're going to be a purist, in the sense of being a purist and saying, we're going by what Ayn Rand said, well, then the first thing they need to do is act with a lot more circumspection about saying this is what objectivism is and this is what Ayn Rand says. Today, if you're going to speak 30-something years after Ayn Rand's death, you need to say, well, this is my interpretation of what Ayn Rand said. And here's my justification for believing we should or should not have border restrictions or border control, or why we should or should not have tariffs on China, or why we should or shouldn't trade with dictatorships. There are a whole bunch of political events, or why a whole bunch of cultural issues should or should not be, in or part of the law the way they are or not. It's okay
Absolutely.
to disagree on it. It's okay to invoke Ayn Rand's writings and say, this is what Ayn Rand said, and this is what I think objectivism holds. But to arrogate to yourself the right to say, not just this is my interpretation of what Ayn Rand said, but to say, this is it, and you're not an objectivist. The way Yaron said not too long ago when he called a bunch of us fifth columnists.
That's
I
right.
think that's not just offensive, but counterproductive, and it's destructive of objectivism, and not just destructive in its own right. But just to finish my thought, I think that he's wrong. I mean, he's wrong both in his content and he's wrong in his methodology. And I don't mean to be singling out him because he's got a lot of followers and a lot of people who support him and agree with him. I think all of them, on the issues, I think they're wrong. I think a free society has a right to take actions against foreigners, whether it's through trade restrictions or embargoes or tariffs or immigration restrictions or immigration screenings. There's a whole list of things. And I know we've talked about getting into some of those things. I think that a free society, a free people, doesn't lose the right to separate itself from evil just because it creates a government. I mean, that's to me, the fundamental theme, or one of the fundamental themes of Atlas Shrugged is good needs to separate itself from evil. It needs to withdraw sanction and separate. That's what Galt's Gulch was. And a free people does not lose the right or the moral, the moral need to separate from evil just because they create a government. They don't create a government and then all of a sudden have to have open immigration, free trade with everybody, irrespective of whether you're dealing with the most irrational, enforced altruist societies around the globe. And I think that the average American really does see that that's a problem. And that's why objectivism is not spreading the way you and I think it should be.
They're looking for guidance.
On the merits,
They're looking for guidance.
I think on the merits, they're wrong. I think on the merits, they're wrong. But procedurally, I think they're also wrong in the way that they're just speaking for Ayn Rand as if Ayn Rand is alive and as if Ayn Rand has deputized them to speak for her. She's not alive, and she didn't deputize any of them to speak for her.
They are coasting on a reverence that they have for Ayn Rand that they did not deserve. And that is part of what we're going to explore and make sure that reverence, because, of what does sanctioning mean and of what does, giving someone your support that doesn't deserve it mean? And, I want them.
They have reverence for Ayn Rand, right? I mean, what do you mean they don't deserve reverence for Ayn Rand? Ayn Rand was great.
No, I'm saying that
revere her.
Right. I'm saying that they are giving, a lot of people are giving ARI a reverence that is because of Rand that the people at ARI have not earned through deed.
Well, I don't disagree with that, but I think that's almost a separate issue. I mean, even if they did earn it through deed, even if they were producing lots of books and lots of conferences and lots of, they really were penetrating the society and penetrating the culture, they still wouldn't have the right or the moral right or the moral authority to speak for Ayn Rand. They just don't have it. Ayn Rand was very clear when NBI shut down that she did not want another organization in her name. She did not want anyone speaking for her that she didn't clearly designate as allowed to speak for her. And yet we've got all these people running around insisting that they know what Ayn Rand meant and what Ayn Rand said and how she would vote in the 2016 or 2020 election. And it just flat out contradicts what Ayn Rand specifically said.
Well, it just, it has to do with how she had many ideas for how she wanted things to go that, because of how things turned out with Brandon and Peikoff was the only one left at the end, it turned out that way. The show we talked about is called Ayn Rand Taking Liberty. And,
yes, that's your title. We both agree to it, but you're the one who was sort of the creator of the title. Maybe you want to tell the listeners a little about how you came to that.
Sure. I got into Rand mainly through the author Robert Ringer. I highly recommend him. His Restoring the American Dream had me registering libertarian before I finished it. And it was a great intro to hear that I'm supporting nihilists from Peter Schwartz, by the way. They just call everyone nihilists, libertarians, liberals, and conservatives now. That was around 1990, 8 years after her death. I had the same reaction to her I'd heard others have. I've always thought this, but someone's put it into words. That's what I aspire to do with some of the ideas that I come up with. It was a time, back then, the Berlin Wall had just fallen. Socialism was in temporary retreat. I got to, discover something early that was going to be the next big thing to take hold in society. But you all know the rest of the story. Postmodernist state, Clinton, Bush, Obama, 24 years of bad leadership, now pushing us close to civil strife. The big Rand revolution hasn't.
When you say bad leadership, do you mean for the U.S. government, or you believe for the objectivist movement, or both?
Well,
or what do you mean?
It just, through a combination of, I like to think that if the objectivist movement had spread more, that we might have gotten some better candidates. I know Peikoff in 2004 was telling us we had to vote for Kerry instead of Bush. I'm sure that would have turned out so much better. But, the truth is, that's the idea, that there would have been better candidates with better principles had her ideas spread faster. But, we can sit here and try to assess blame. And there's actually a case to do that in future shows, just to pronounce moral judgment. but they are still looking for people to say, you aren't really objectivists if you support Trump or tariffs. Now after what Peikoff said in 2004, you couldn't even be a good objectivist if you stayed home. Now you have to stay home. It's apparently you aren't really an objectivist if you vote Republican or vote period. The bottom line for me.
Huh?
Well, so there was this vague promise in the early days.
Yeah, I was going to ask, how does this tie back into the taking liberty idea?
Well, it's because they told us early on that a philosophy or movement takes a few generations, 100, 150 years to get into society. Rand might have said something about that. But
I got to stop you right there. I got to interrupt you because
okay.
Absolutely not. That really sticks a craw in me. Not from you, but when I hear every time I've heard Yaron speak, he says something along those lines. That this is a deep problem, and it's going to take generations to solve.
It's an abdication
or more. I'll tell you what. No, it's worse than an abdication. Ayn Rand never said that, and Ayn Rand would never have said that. And I realize I'm speaking for her when I say that. But that is the talk of a 5-year communist plan, and that is not the way Ayn Rand thought. Ayn Rand always had a plan to win. She always had a strategy. Maybe it was hopeless, but I just have to refer you to the end of We the Living and Kira. Kira was facing ridiculous odds, but there was still a plan. This is what I'm going to do, and I'm going to escape, and I'm going to make it to the West, and I'm going to succeed. There was always a plan. There was none of this, it's going to take generations. It's not going to be in my lifetime.
Right.
Absolutely not. And that's one of the things that just really rubs me raw about the objectivist leadership today. No, if you can't come up with a plan that's going to win soon, then you are not the right leader for this movement, because we are not a communist movement. We are not a movement of 5-year plans that just goes off into eternity, into the future. We are a movement that is about living a good life today in the here and now. We're not scoring chips, moral chips for heaven. We're not looking for our children's children or our children. I mean, yes, we want our children to have a good life, but it's about living a good life today, and there's got to be a plan to win today. And this nonsense that I hear every time I've seen Yaron speak, that this is a generations-long program, it's going to take decades, if not a century or more, to solve. To me, it's worse than abdication. It's surrender, and it's not what objectivism is about, in my opinion.
You're right. Their attitude is like John Mayer's song, "Waiting on the World to Change." And, in Barbara Brandon's movie, The Passion of Ayn Rand, Rand says angrily on separate occasions to both Frank and Nathaniel when they ask if she wants to be intimate. She says, "Why must you always ask for permission?" And you pointed out, Dagny says that at one point during her encounters. Don't ask, just don't ask. So,
right.
Liberty doesn't just happen. We have to fight for it, to ultimately take it from those forces for whichever motive, they want power over other people, even on an institutional level. That means it might even get a little rough sometimes, not initiating force, but certainly not self-censoring to hope the left won't be mean to us anymore. But, what fight for freedom isn't a little rough sometimes? And
I agree.
You probably figured this out about me, but reverence is not my strong suit.
No.
I love I love Rand. I just, just like I don't believe in collective punishment, I don't believe in collective love. And my love for Rand doesn't go to those people at Peikoff or Brooke. Like I was saying, Peikoff, great job on OPAR. It doesn't give you an excuse to support John Kerry. And, Carl Burney, the Scientologist, now the Ayn Rand donor, he's got this objectivist venture fund. I think they may call it the Prometheus Fund, but he's basically providing venture capital to people with ideas on how to spread objectivism. Wasn't that ARI's purpose? What, you mean Fountainhead essay contests aren't cutting it? ARI has more money than ideas now, because there is a tremendous amount of wealth being created, but they're just, I think they're out of ideas. We're going to get into open and closed philosophy on this show, that the people with the closed philosophy mentality are most likely to conflate objectivism with her personal views on a variety of subjects. And so, and that's important because I think even her ideas for spreading the philosophy are not the philosophy itself and are open to debate. Like how we go about whether they have to start with metaphysics. I think that, there's, I come from Jewish ancestry, so did Rand, and so there we go. Jews, actually are not the best at proselytizing. They're like, okay, well, if you want to join, I suppose so, but you have to read a bunch of stuff first, and we're going to make it really tough. And, that's
right. We're not it's not a proselytizing religion. I mean, and I don't think it's coincidence that so many Jews are attracted to objectivism, because Judaism basically says we just want to be left alone. We have our beliefs. If you want to join us, fine. If you don't, that's fine too. Just leave us alone, leave us in peace, and we'll work and we'll take care of our own community and we'll do what we want to do. And obviously they're not objectivists. Obviously the first thing in any religion is faith, and faith is not what objectivism is about. But once you get past that initial belief in God, and even with that belief in God, I mean, I studied Judaism for a long time, and when you study the Talmud, you're supposed to question everything, including the existence of God, in the same way Thomas Jefferson said. And so, Judaism does have, on a cultural level, I think it's got a lot of, what's the right word? I think it can dovetail into objectivism in a lot of ways on a cultural level, not on an epistemological level, but on a cultural level.
Maybe it can, but in terms of creating a kind of cultural dominance, I guess is where I'm going. That it took a guy, it took a Gentile Paul to actually go and say to these Jews that were the apostles and say, we may actually get more people if we don't just try to convert other Jews. And I think
you're not converting other Jews; you're just trying to bring them to temple and bring them into the fold. But yeah, well, they were saying we'll convert Gentiles, and then Christianity became a world force as a result. And so maybe we need a different attitude about it. People can be harsh to some. I've actually seen people on even these ARI types be nicer to say young girls that are getting into the philosophy. Promote the ideas like they're all young girls. That actually may make some of them way too nervous. Well, I'm just saying that I'm giving them advice on having a better temperament and not trying to turn people off to the ideas. Yeah, I mean, I don't think you can talk about that and separate it from them being wrong on the merits of the ideas. I mean, yes, I think that their advocacy skills have something to be desired, but on the other hand, Yaron is not the worst speaker in the world. I mean, he gets a little grief about some of his accent and his lisp, but he's got a lot of practice speaking. It's not like he's awful in front of a camera, but I think he's wrong on the issues, and so wrong and so confrontationally wrong. He's I would say belligerently ignorant about certain things, and especially about solutions to real problems that real Americans have. And his only solution is basically bend over and take it. And if you can't take it and you can't suffer through it, then that shows your own moral weakness. And more to concretize that, look at the whole problem of Muslim immigration, and then not just Muslim immigration, but third world immigration. We're bringing over a whole bunch of people that don't believe in American ideals and objectivist ideals of individual rights and limited government. And there are a lot of American people who look around and say, yes, our schools suck. Our schools are turning out bad robots for our children. But we don't need to add to that problem by importing millions, if not tens of millions, of people that are antagonistic to our society and our culture from abroad. And Yaron's answer to them is, well, tough. Suck it up and deal with it. And the average person hears that, or I don't even want to speak for the average person. I hear it, and I say, you're crazy. You're out of your mind. This is a real problem. It's not something made up. It's not something phony. It's not something subjective in someone's head. It's a real problem, and our society is slowly but surely withering away. And it's not because of the conservatives. It's because of people letting go and not fighting this evil that's beginning to envelop us and that has been enveloping us for 50 or more years. And it's time to fight it. And that's why so many people, I think, are attracted to Trump. Because for all of his flaws and all of his own personal moral failings, Trump understands that in order for him to win the presidency in 2016 and in 2020, he needs to be seen as the man who's willing to fight this evil. And that's what he's showing himself to be, and that's what he's trying to do, however imperfectly.
I mean, he is fighting it. If only you can see him taking the slings and arrows for the fights and the things he's doing. So, whether it's for his own electoral or wanting to be remembered fondly, I mean, that, like you said, that still represents a type of self-interest.
Not just that, but if you go back to what Ayn Rand said in, judging a political candidate, if he does the right thing for the wrong reasons, the problem is his, not ours. He's not our philosopher king. We're not supposed to look up to him with the reverence of a god, that we have to follow him for moral leadership. We've elected him to do a specific job as an executive. And if he does that job and he protects American interests, God bless him, or God bless him, to use a more objectivist phrase. And, to me, the objectivist movement should be praising him and thanking him, even while, criticizing him for things that they might disagree with. But on a more basic, fundamental level, he's mostly doing good. And he may be doing it for the wrong reasons. He may be doing it for his own personal vanity. He may think that he's going to become even more rich from being president and create a political dynasty for Trump the way the Kennedys did. Who knows what his real motives are, but the real motives are irrelevant. He's doing very good things, and he's helping us fight this monstrous evil that the left is posing to us, and we should be thankful to it. And instead of thanking him, we've got the objectivist movement pretty much attacking him in unison and joining with the left in trying to destroy the one man that's trying to fight to protect us from this evil. And I think that a lot of Americans, without knowing any of the philosophy of objectivism, know this man is fighting for us. He may not be a good man. I may not let my daughter stay in the same room as him. I might not enter a contract with him and do business with him, but he is doing what we need to do as a society and as a culture to protect us from a lot of really bad things that some really bad people are trying to perpetrate against us. And whatever his motives are, he's the only guy who's fighting and standing up for us and protecting us from those evil things.
And them not seeing that starts to make us question their motives about everything else. I mean, Rand wrote about moral cowardice. We're going to get into that issue, where she talks about how no one can keep that sense for too long. Here it is. Moral cowardice is the fear of upholding the good because it is good, and fear of opposing the evil because it is evil. The next step leads to opposing the good in order to appease evil and rushing out to seek the evil's favor. But since no mind can fully hide this policy from itself, and no form of pseudo-self-esteem can disguise it for long, the next step is to pounce on every possible or impossible chance to blacken the nature of the good and to whitewash the nature of the evil. Sound familiar?
Sounds familiar. You and I have discussed that. I'm not sure I'm fully in agreement on that one. I don't know that I think it's moral cowardice. I think that, I think they believe that they're on a moral crusade. And I don't think that they're, yes, I think they're appeasing, but I don't think they're moral cowards. I think they're just wrong. And they're fighting to, I'm sorry, to finish the thought. I think they're fighting to the death for something that's wrong. That's not what a moral coward does. A moral coward, stays off the battlefield and doesn't offer anything.
I mean, he still wants to be known and to be admired, but he hasn't put up any real fight. And, the idea that they are continuing to make excuses, when people self-censor themselves, when people are scared and they are cowardly, they don't want to admit it to themselves. They'll come up with a reason.
Who's the he you're talking about there?
Yaron Brook.
Gotcha.
when
I'm sorry,
a
go ahead, finish
person,
what you're saying.
that's all right. When a person does that, they're not going to admit that they just want the left to like them, or that the argument from intimidation does actually work. Getting called heartless and bigoted does start to have an effect on people after a while, and you just want it to go away. But you don't admit that. You turn it into some highfalutin thing about Trump did something to really just over the line, and you can't take it anymore.
Yeah, I mean, I understand what you're saying. I'm not, criticizing you, but I can't say I fully agree with that. To me, I think it's more. I think that Yaron and other Texas leaders see more. I'm sorry.
I was just going to say that debate will be a theme. Yes, can you hear me?
Yes. Yeah, I can hear you fine. I think it's more that they view the right as a competitor, and I think that they don't view the left as a competitor. They feel like they can win against the left after they've defeated everybody on the right. And they view the people on the right as people that need to be defeated, instead of viewing the left as a monstrous evil that needs to be defeated. And, once the left is defeated, then we can talk about the problems on the right and see who can come out on top there, which is how I view it, and I think how you view it.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what I was saying. Whether or not it's cowardice or some other motive, I think that's worth exploring. You talked about the importance of not psychologizing, and I do think that's valuable, but I do think that we have a right to speculate on motivation. The people that don't want to debate us, they have a right not to debate us, but then they don't have the ability to correct us on what we speculate their motives are. And so, I'm open to evidence, and I'm open to evidence that it's not the case, and we'll just find out. I actually took a couple of these Ayn Rand guys that I was saying, look, these people are calling her a bigot. Why don't you come with me and come on these sites where they're attacking her, and we'll fight them together. I'll come in with you. No, they didn't want to do that. So that's part of where I came up with that hypothesis, and we'll continue to show other examples. We've got some Yaron clips that we'll be playing in future weeks as well.
Yeah,
I do want to at least address what I said to Trzynski. And, he is someone, he's someone that came out recently. I was Facebook friends with him. I had to defriend him because he came out and said, the real reason I don't know if he said the real reason, but he said, the reason we want to impeach Trump is because he's a rotten person. And every one of you knows it. Which, when they say, and you know it, that's a pet peeve of mine, because they're saying, now it's a breach of morality. It can't even be an error of knowledge. It's not even open for debate. And if you don't believe it, you're not an objectivist. And so
I understand why you think that. I don't know that Robert Trzynski is saying that. I don't think that I've ever seen Robert say, well, you're not an objectivist, the way, say, Yaron Brook has said you're not an objectivist. But go on. I don't mean to interrupt you. Your train of thought there.
So, and then someone on his post was saying, they were giving Robert a chance to explain, saying the standard is supposed to be high crimes and misdemeanors. And, so what is it that he's done? And I said, look, I said to the person saying this, you're a good person. I appreciate your spirit of giving him a chance to explain, but he's already answered. He wants Trump impeached because he's a rotten human being. And anything he says now is just a rationalization of the original position. That's the same thing the left does, too. These, to me, these ARI folks have about 1 year to redeem themselves to those of us that identified the true nature of postmodernists first. Find some reason for yourself to justify voting for Trump. Maybe it's because Warren's the nominee, and say it publicly. That is the only way for me to ever respect you again at this point. And I'm quite prepared to defend that as a principle. We can do that on this show if they ever get that curious. And then, I hit them with a little zinger at the end. And for those that won't do that, Ayn Rand should have slapped them even harder than Brandon for betraying her and for failing to come to her and reality's defense.
Well, I'll let you I'll leave that as your opinion. I prefer not to try and speculate as to whether Ayn Rand would have slapped him or not. If people need to redeem themselves, I mean, I don't view myself as any kind of objectivist pope or high priest, but I totally understand what you're saying.
My judgment.
I hear you, and I mean, I think that I try and remember how I felt going into the election in 2016, and while I could never have voted for Hillary, before I knew how Trump was going to govern, I honestly didn't think that he was going to be much better, if better. So I don't hold it against someone who didn't agree with me in 2016, and frankly, I wasn't a Trump supporter in 2016. I was part of the Never Trump movement. So if I had, I might be one of those people that needed redemption, but I guess you probably would say I redeemed myself by saying, this guy is doing a good job. I was wrong about him, and you know what? That's another theme that I'd like to eventually, I don't know about explore, but I mean, it's something I think is going to be a recurring theme on the show. Objectivism doesn't mean that you can't admit that you were wrong, or that you don't have all the facts, or that you don't know something.
Absolutely.
And you can make
That's crucial.
You can make your best prediction, and you can make your best argument, and if somebody else shows you maybe you're mistaken, or to this, I'll go to my grave, whenever my time comes, thinking I was right to not support Trump in 2016. But I can also admit I was wrong. Or even if I wasn't wrong, maybe I was right at the time. But as it turns out, the potential dangers that I saw haven't materialized. And in fact, a lot of good things that I didn't see forthcoming have materialized. And we've got some changed facts and new facts. And that's what objectivism teaches you, that you always have to be open to new facts and to integrate new facts into your belief system. And, if the new facts contradict what you believed before, you need to be able to change your mind. And unfortunately, so many objectivists from the leadership on down think that being an objectivist means never having to say you were wrong, never having to say you didn't know, and never having to say I'm sorry. And, not that I'm looking to shame people and, make them ask for redemption and forgiveness and all that. I'm not a Christian or a religious person, and I don't mean to attack Christians by saying that, but, I don't believe in a confessional situation. But at the same time, these people who seem to be holding on to some truth that is as false as I'm thinking, I'm sorry, I'm sort of slipping away there. Baghdad Bob, you remember Baghdad Bob?
Sure.
The infidel is not in Baghdad, and then in the background of his press conference, you could see the tanks. And these objectivist leaders, it's the same thing. They still say that they're proud of having voted for Hillary, and Yaron even said not too long ago that Andrew Yang looks like a good candidate. And I just don't see it. I don't see how you can look at Trump and see him in exactly the same way today as you saw him in 2015, 2016. I agreed with him in 2015, 2016, but he has demonstrated that whatever fears I had, justified or not, they haven't come to pass. They haven't materialized. And, I can admit that I made a mistake about it. And, things have changed. And when the facts on the ground change, I change my view with them.
That's why I'm glad to be doing the show with you.
Likewise.
That's the type of spirit we need in objectivism. They would say, oh, you can't even call yourself an objectivist. Oh, that's fine. Then I'm a fan. But, that's what we're here to do. We're going to be doing it for the next year. We are also, just to show our commitment to be open to debate, we are actually, not this show, someone may have already tried to call in, but we are going to allow callers eventually, and we're just going to take calls and field them and just talk about issues openly, have a debate. Even if I may get some lefties calling here just to have you see how the fights go or something.
That's certainly open. That's certainly a possibility. We're not necessarily looking to preach to the choir.
Absolutely. But they're welcome to call in too.
Yeah.
Praise is part of judgment.
Well, I would just, welcome all of our listeners, whoever they may be, to share the podcast widely, and, don't just only share it to people that are like-minded. Although, of course, do share them with like-minded people. But, we're not afraid to debate people. We're not afraid to listen to what other people have to say. And, like you said, we're looking to expand the scope and reach of objectivism. And, part of doing that means going into enemy territory.
Absolutely. Well, I'm glad. I think this was a good show. We're getting the kinks worked out. We're even going to get some theme music eventually. And I look forward to taking this journey with you and fighting the good fight.
And this has been fun. I'm looking forward to our next episode already, and hopefully the viewers, or the listeners, I should say, will appreciate it as well.
Good. Well, I'm Scott Schiff. Again, this is Ed Maslish, and together we are the hosts of Ayn Rand, Taking Liberty. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.